Good morning, everyone. We're honored today to welcome Swami Atmarupananda, Minister of Vedanta Society of Greater Houston. For many years, he was engaged in pioneering work as the resident minister of the Vedanta Society of Southern California, San Diego, and then as the resident minister of the Vivekananda Retreat at Stone Ridge, New York. More recently, he spent 5.5 years at the headquarters of the order in India, working on a new edition of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda in 10 volumes. For many years, Swami Atmarupananda has been actively engaged in interreligious dialogue here in the Americas and around the world, including international conferences on Hindu-Buddhist dialogue, Hindu-Islamic dialogue, and pursuit of a spiritual foundation for societies around the world. The topic of his talk this morning is, What is the World? Swamiji.
Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma mritam gamaya avirmaedhi rudrayatte dakshinam mukham Tena mam pahi nityam, tena mam pahi nityam. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourself, O Lord, and protect us evermore from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Om Vishnurva Tripurantako Bhavatu Va Brahma Surendrotha Va Bhanurva Shashalakshanota Bhagavan Buddhota Siddhota Va Ragadvesha Visharti Moharahita Sattvanukampodhyato Yasarvai Sahasamskrito Gunaganais Tasmai Namah Sarvada. The Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. But as for me, I offer my worship always to the one going by any name and belonging to any tradition, who is free from attachment and hatred, free from worldliness and delusion, who is filled with compassion towards all living beings, and who is possessed of all noble virtues. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. Good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here to speak at the Vedanta Society of New York. As you know, it's older than the Ramakrishna Mission itself, the first center established by Swamiji himself. There are only two centers existing in America that were established by Swamiji, and that is New York and San Francisco. And though people from San Francisco will never tell you this, Swamiji was reluctantly dragged into being present at the founding of the Vedanta Society of San Francisco, but this center he established deliberately. So if anyone from San Francisco tries to put one over on you, as we say in English, American slang, don't let them. And also such prestigious people, Swamiji himself, not in this building, but the Vedanta Society as an institution. Swamiji himself addressed it. Swami Abhedananda was in charge of it. The great Swami Bodhanandaji, Swamiji's disciple, Swami Pavitrananda, Swami Tathagatanandaji, and now one of the best speakers in the whole order, Swami Sarvapriyanandaji. So it's a very blessed center and a very special center. In fact, that's why I was present at the headquarters in Belur Mutt when they decided to move Swami Sarvapriyananda from Los Angeles here, and it was because they wanted to put a very special Swami, a very talented Swami, here in honor of the 150th anniversary of Swami Atmarupanandaji's birth, since he had been head here after Swami Vivekananda. So it's a very special center, and I'm very honored to be here. As Diane told you, my subject this morning is what is the world, which means what is this? What is this that we see in front of us? We all think that we know what the world is. It seems obvious. If I ask you what is the world, someone might give an intellectual answer. Someone might give a historical answer, someone might give a scientific answer, but it would be enough to say, well, this, what do you think it is? This is the world. You can see it, you can touch it, you can taste it, you can smell it. This is the world that we live in the midst of. The question, what is the world, sounds like it's somewhat should have an obvious answer. But of course we know, if we are at all reflective, we know that the answer isn't obvious. Again, the obvious answer is, the world is this place on this planet, the surface of the planet where we live. There are objects of various types. There are persons which we experience as different from objects. I can address you, and no matter what level your intelligence or what development of mind you have, I feel that there is someone there I can communicate with and that can communicate back to me. So there are persons, and persons include at least animals, at least higher animals that we can address. But then as we begin to look at other animals, reptiles, and what we consider as below reptiles on the evolutionary chart, we see that there's personhood there too. That even a bacteria responds to stimuli. A bacteria tries to preserve its life, tries to preserve the continuity of life. And so there are persons. So there are things which don't seem to respond. There are persons, and there's time, the time which marks off the changes in the world, and there's space in which all of our experience takes place, in which the world exists. And so that is the world. At least we think that is the world. If we go back to our childhood, not childhood, our babyhood. That's a little hard to do. Most of us don't have babyhood memories. But if we are around babies, we can begin to sort of intuit or begin to feel something of what the baby must be experiencing. And we may even have some sort of intuition of what the baby's experience is. The mother of a newborn baby, of course, is very much in tune with the baby. And a baby seems to experience just a mass of sensations. The baby comes out of the womb, and at first the baby is very surprised, first of all, by birth. What happened? What's going on here? And it seems to be sort of withdrawn as it was in the womb. It's in its own little world. And then it begins to open its eyes and just stares. You look at a baby's eyes are the most wonderful thing. You can stare right into the baby's eyes, and there's no little person and no little egotistical person in there that feels sensitive. You can stare right in the baby's eyes, and the baby just stares back like you're looking into an ocean. You're not looking at a sensitive person that might feel, why are you staring at me? No, it's just, the baby looks at everything just with wonder. And so everything in the baby's experience is wonderful, new, trying to figure it out. And so out of this, as psychologists call it, the oceanic sensations, just an ocean of sensations that come to the baby gradually begins to experience patterns. It begins to recognize the mother, that this bundle of sensations that is so warm, which is so intimate, and which feeds me. It recognizes the mother, then begins to recognize other patterns. But at first it can't even distinguish its own body from the world around it. The baby has to learn to distinguish its body from the world around. And that's where our problem begins. We learn that too well. I'll come back to this point later with more depth, but the baby begins to see that if it's touched, or if it touches itself on the skin, it feels it. If someone touches the crib or something, it doesn't feel it. That the baby begins to realize that the extent of its body is where the nerve endings in the skin end. So the baby, of course, one of its main, besides the eyes, the other main organ of experience is the mouth. So the baby puts its hand in its mouth, the fingers in the mouth, anything it can reach, it stuffs in the mouth. And eventually it discovers its foot. And that's a delightful moment in when watching a baby, when the baby discovers its foot and puts its foot in its mouth. And we spend the rest of our lives trying to take it out. So the baby gradually begins to recognize more and more patterns. We see from that knowledge, all knowledge is nothing but recognizing patterns. Physical patterns, mental patterns, intellectual patterns, abstract idea patterns, patterns and relationships between patterns. That's what knowledge is. As Swamiji says, knowledge is nothing but classification. When I began to study biology, the serious biology, not university level, but in high school, when ninth and 10th grade, when biology began to become really serious, and I learned that much of botany and zoology was just classifying different species, and I thought, well, what's the use of that? But no, that's actually what knowledge is. It's just that in biology they made a point of it, botany and zoology, but that's really what knowledge is classification. So the baby begins without recognizing anything, and then gradually it begins to fit into patterns, and those patterns begins to make sense out of the world. And we go on through life trying to make sense out of the world. And so our intellectual categories like time and space, and even a thing like thing, the word thing, Bishoy in Bengali, or every language has some sort of word for thing, where you don't want to specify a particular thing, but you just have a word for thing, whatever it is. It's really an amazing word, an amazing concept, that we have a concept for thing, whatever that thing is. No descriptor, nothing more than just thing. Everything is a thing. And so we go on making sense of the world in that way. And modern science began not by questioning our common sense. Modern science began in a wonderful way. There had always been science. Since there have been human beings, there has been science. Modern science, the specialty of modern science was that they developed a strict method and a way of collecting and data, analyzing data, and then studying it in a particular rigorous way. So the modern science is really just a rigorous way of doing what everyone from babyhood on up has done. People have always tried to figure out, what is the world? What is all of this? What are these things that I see? What is it? So there's always been science. It's just that modern science applied a rigorous method to it. And so when what we call modern science began, as we know it now in Europe, they took the world as we experience it for granted. But there was one great difference. Before modern science arose, most people, not everybody, but again, most people, if they wanted to know what this was, they looked in an ancient text, an ancient scripture, and found out what it was. Where is our place in the universe? We'll open the ancient scriptures and look at that. Modern science began by saying, what is this in its own terms? What am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I tasting? Again, that's where the baby starts also. But then once we get older, then we begin to think, well, let me go to an authority, and the authority was usually a scripture. And so see what the scripture says about all of this. In ancient Greece, of course, they began to do more than that. In ancient India, they did much more than that also. But modern science, as we know it, was the beginnings of looking at the world in a detailed way, in its own terms, finding the explanation of a thing within the thing itself. Not saying, well, who made this rock? How did God make it? And when did God make it? No. What is the rock itself? What is the rock itself? How can I analyze the rock, take it apart and understand it in terms of the rock itself? And yes, of course, look at the context where the rock came from, but not looking to a scriptural text to illumine the search. And so that was a wonderful thing. Again, not unique. The unique part was the rigorous method that was applied, but not unique because in other parts of the world, in all parts of the world, some people had looked at things in terms of themselves, but again, not in a massive, disciplined, rigorous way. And so science, again, didn't begin by questioning space and time and materiality, objectivity, and all of that. It began by accepting common sense experience and just said, what is this that we experience in our everyday life? What are these objects in the skies that we see that look so far away? What are they? What explains their movement? And so on. And so whether it was terrestrial or gazing at the heavens, they began to look and try to explain things in terms of themselves without challenging common sense. Though quickly they found that they had to challenge textual sense, that is scriptural sense. They began to find that the idea, for instance, in Europe, again coming back to Europe, that the idea that the earth is at the center of the universe, that doesn't hold. So let me say that there is a way, it is quite legitimate, it's quite legitimate to look at the earth as the center of the universe. That's quite legitimate. There's nothing wrong with that scientifically, intellectually, philosophically. But what they found was that if you look at the earth as the stable center of the universe and the heavens whirling around it, yes, that may be a perfectly legitimate way of looking at the earth, but the movements of the heavens become extremely complex. And so then when Copernicus said that no, the sun is at the center of the solar system and the earth and other planets move around the sun, suddenly heavenly movements became simple. They became simple, easy to calculate. In Ptolemaic astronomy, before the time of Copernicus, they had remarkable abilities to calculate heavenly movements and to predict heavenly phenomena. But it was extraordinarily complex. Copernicus made it simple, and so that was one of the elements of modern science was that simplicity was of value in itself. Simplicity of knowledge was something that was sought. But for our purposes today, more interesting is the fact that as science went on analyzing the world of common sense, again, the world of matter, the world of living beings, and so forth, they began to find that the world of common sense began to fall apart, like Alice in Wonderland, that the whole world of common sense began to fall apart. And that was actually very, very disturbing to the scientists who began to find that the world is not what it looks like. This process, of course, especially accelerated in the 19th century and in the 20th century. This process of the common sense worldview becoming less and less common sense. And just to give one simple example that we're all familiar with, that this solid podium, solid, heavy material podium is not solid at all. It's just electric charges and vast amounts of space and extraordinarily tiny electric particles. It's mostly empty space. That's not the common sense podium, but that's the scientific podium. This is not solid. The reason why it resists my hand also, which feels solid and which hurts when it hits too hard on the podium, which seems so hard and solid, it also is just mostly empty space and electrical charges. Of course, with the discovery of subatomic particles and so forth, it's a little more complex than that, but that's basically what it is, empty space and electrical charge. And so the world of common sense began to disappear at the microscopic level, not just microscopic, but the minute level especially, the world of quantum physics, and at the macroscopic, at the huge level, the realm of relativity. As long as we stay within the world of common sense experience, Newtonian physics is fine. It works just fine for our everyday purposes. That's why they still teach Newtonian physics, because the laws discovered by Newton and his peers and the people before him and after him in that same mold, for everyday experience it works fine. But when we look deeper, we find it doesn't work at all. And what science hasn't questioned, philosophy can question. So we're in even deeper trouble if we go to philosophy. And we begin to question, and we can question on the basis of modern scientific discovery, which is even more interesting than just idle philosophy, just floating in the atmosphere by itself. That also has its value. I don't mean to discount it. Unfortunately, science today has become greatly discounted because science can make a huge, very heavy piece of metal fly in the sky, and you see it. So you can't say that, I don't believe in the principles of aerodynamics. Well, come, get in the airplane and you'll see. It works. And philosophy seems to be just the scratching of the brain without any practical results. But no, philosophy has more value than that. But science, again, deals with that which can be replicated and proven and can be demonstrated. See, this works. This is the way it works. You can't deny it. You can question the theoretical foundations, but not deny some of the basic principles, at least within a certain realm of experience. And coming to philosophy, you find that time and space are not what they appear to be. Newton took a common sense view of time and of space and of causation. But we'll restrict ourselves to time and space for a moment because I've got a lot of ground to cover and not as much time as ground. So Newton took time as just like a cosmic clock, not actually a clock, of course, but the time is an absolute. The time just goes ticking away, and we use clocks to measure time, but what we're measuring is an actual thing, a principle of the universe, that there is time, just objective time, and that my time, your time, South African time, Indian time, Chinese time, it's all the same time. It's all ticking in the same way. And so time is an objective, absolute phenomenon, and space. Space is just this. The whole universe exists within space. Einstein showed that time and space are relative. That's often misunderstood. People say that Einstein showed that everything is relative. No, Einstein didn't show that everything is relative. He might have argued for the relativity of most things, but that wasn't the point of relativity theory. He showed that time and space, the perception of time and space are relative to the position of the observer within the universe, within time and space. And your perception of time and space will change with your velocity, etc. But philosophy questions time and space themselves. What is time? Time, from a philosophical standpoint, is nothing but the perception of change. Time is nothing but the perception of change. How can we know that? Well, if you argue it philosophically, it makes some philosophical sense. But there's an experiential way that we can know that time is just the measure of change. And that is that those who have gone into samadhi, even lower samadhi, one of the characteristics of even a lower samadhi, and lower samadhi, of course, from our standpoint, is very high. It's lower samadhi in relationship to nirvikalpa samadhi. But even a lower samadhi, the perception of time is almost absent. Why? Because the same wave keeps rising in the mind. The mind is active like everything in nature. The mind is active by its nature. And as long as we're operating through the mind, then there's a wave in the mind, a wave of perception. So even in samadhi, other than nirvikalpa samadhi, even in samadhi, there's a wave that arises in the mind. But what makes it samadhi different from our present experience is that the same wave is rising again and again and again, giving the perception of absolute stability. And so there's no perception of change. And so the perception of time disappears. The perception of time disappears. A person who goes into samadhi, and again, speaking of a lower samadhi, goes into samadhi and then comes out, they have no idea how much time has passed. No idea, because time was still. Now, to be absolutely correct, I have to say it's almost still, because still there is the rising of waves. There is still change going on. But the mind in that state doesn't normally see the change, the waves rising and setting, rising and setting, rising and setting, because it happens too fast to be perceived. But there is still the very slight, highly refined sense of time, because there is change still going on within the mind. Space. What is space? Space is what you get when you have diversity, difference. If you have difference, you have space. There's a podium here, there's a flower pot there. If there were nothing else here but just this and that, the floor, the walls, the ceiling, all of you were to disappear, there would still be a sense in my awareness or your awareness, if you were still able to perceive, space because of the difference between these two. So space is the perception of distance, the perception of difference, difference within a particular thing. They've done neurophysiological tests. This was many, many years ago. They probably have it much more refined now, but this I read about 40 years or so ago. They would cut a ping pong ball in half and put the two halves over someone's eyes, so that all that they could see was a uniform white field, no differentiation, no veining in the ball or anything like that, just a white field. What happened was, after some time, first the person would just see white, and after some time the very sense of seeing itself would disappear. The feeling that the sense that they were looking at something, that there was a white field they were looking at, they knew that these ping pong balls had been put there, and so they're seeing this white, and they know that what they're looking at is a ping pong ball, even though they don't see any differentiation. But after a while, even that disappears, and the sense that they're even seeing disappears, showing that sight is dependent on differentiation also. And so space is the perception of diversity, difference, distance. Time is the measure of change. Where you have no distance, no diversity, no differentiation, space disappears. Where you have no change, time disappears. As Swami Vivekananda said, and as Immanuel Kant said in Western philosophy in his own way, that time and space are part of the structure of the mind. We can only see, we can only experience things in terms of time and space because that's the way the mind is made. The mind is made in terms of time and space. When time and space disappear completely, the mind itself disappears. And so that's where you get to the highest samadhi, what's known as the highest samadhi, which we read about, where the mind itself stops. The mind stops because there the mind can't function. Though another way of looking at it, as Sri Ramakrishna taught, and as the Vedanta texts have also sometimes mentioned, it wasn't unique to Ramakrishna, but he made a point of it, that the mind, there are two ways of looking at this. The one is that the mind just falls away. But Sri Ramakrishna said no. The pure mind, the pure buddhi, that is the highest part of the mind, the pure self, are all the same thing. So what happens when in nirvikalpa samadhi is attained, then the mind is merged back into the self, that which it is. Swami Atmarupananda used to say that the mind is the sense of difference. The mind is nothing but the sense of difference. And so when that sense of difference is there, then we begin to see differentiation. Whether we see this world or some other realm of existence, we see differentiation. So time and space, Einstein himself and other scientists have questioned our perception of time and space, the absolute nature of our time and space. And philosophy begins to question the very nature of time and space, the solidity and certainly the objectivity of time and space. Another thing, matter. This is physical matter. Everything is made of physical matter, apparently. Have you ever seen matter? Have you felt matter? Have you tasted it? No, nobody has ever seen matter. It's impossible to experience matter. You've never experienced matter. And any philosopher of science has to agree. They do agree, and they have to agree because it's provable, it's demonstrable, that you've never experienced matter. Never in your life. So materialism is the most foolish of philosophies. The materialist says that matter is the only thing that we're sure of. Consciousness, that's just a product of matter. God, all of that is just, those are just imaginations for weak minds. That there's only matter, that's all we know. You have never, nor has anyone ever experienced matter. It's impossible to experience matter. And I'm speaking in scientifically demonstrable terms. I'll explain it in a moment. But you've never experienced matter. It's impossible to experience matter. Let me take a diversion for a moment in explaining this. It'll seem like I'm going way, way off. Hopefully I'll remember and come back and not get lost in my own tangent. But you've heard the Hindu idea of the 5 elements. It sounds like very bad science, what people came up with when they couldn't think scientifically, so they made up 5 elements. Greeks had 4 elements. Hindus did them one better and said, no, they're actually 5 elements. Buddhists generally said there were 4 elements, except for some of the Tibetans that were more influenced by Vedantic type ideas that came into Buddhism, and they said, yes, 5 elements. But most Buddhists say 4 elements. The Greeks said 4 elements. Hindus say 5. Why? It's not that they were working in the dark in the absence of the periodic table of chemical elements. They didn't know the periodic table of chemical elements. No, they didn't know that. And that's a great modern discovery, a huge discovery. But that's not what they were interested in. They were interested in understanding this. And so the idea of the 5 elements is what? It was based on experience, not on the absence of good science. It was an experiential idea. There are 5 senses through which I experience the world. And each of the 5 elements pertains to one of the senses. What do I see through the eye? The Hindu said that's the element of fire that I see through the eye. What does that mean? I see nothing but light through the eye. Color, which is the mind's interpretation of wavelengths of light. The eye can see nothing but color. You say, well, Swami, you see texture and all of that. Yes, texture is just differentiation of light. That's why you can paint texture on a canvas. Though you don't feel it, you can paint it so it looks like texture. The eye sees nothing but light. The ear hears nothing but sound. That was the element of space, according to the Hindus. The ear hears nothing of sound. So the element... There are all types of sounds, just as there are all types of light, colors, differentiation, light and dark, brighter light, lesser light, but it's all light. And so sound is all the same thing, just differentiation of the same thing. I smell, I taste, I touch. All of the senses give us the experience of something that is very, very diverse, but it's a diversification of one principle. And so the 5 elements pertain to the 5 sense ways of seeing the universe. So now, coming back to where I was, science and the idea that no one has ever experienced matter, nor can you. And even people like Bertrand Russell said things like this. He didn't give this analysis I'm going to give, but said the same basic thing. Taking the scientific view, which I think is a good view of how the senses operate. I'm seeing you and seeing this room now. What's happening? The light is coming in through the eye, focused by the lens in the eye, less and less well, that's why I have to wear glasses now, but still somewhat focused by the lens of the eye, falling on the retina. And the retina has cells which are sensitive to light and the differences in light. And so the receptor cells in the retina, they send a message along the optic nerve to the visual center in the brain. They're not sending light along the optic nerve. They're not squirting blue and red and green dye up through the optic nerve into the brain. No, nothing that I'm seeing is being sent to the brain. What's being sent is a message. And that message is decoded in the visual center of the brain, and then the mind produces this. What I'm seeing is within my own mind. You are all within my own mind. Now, if that sounds egotistical, then you can remind me that, well, Swami, you're also in our minds. So, and if I speak too long, you'll be ready to get me out of it. So I see color, but as I learned in the junior high school, color is not in nature. Color is my interpretation, your interpretation of wavelengths of light. But all I see is color. So I'm not seeing light, I'm seeing the mind's recreation of something and interpretation of something. I feel this desk, I feel temperature and I feel pressure through the sense of touch. Am I feeling the desk? No, not at all. There are nerve endings within my skin, nerve endings within the skin of the palm of my hand, or whatever I'm touching with, in this case the palm of my hand. And they are receiving a certain message. They encode that message. Again, they're not receiving temperature and pressure. They are sensitive to temperature and pressure and registering a reaction. And that reaction is encoded and sent along the nerves up into the brain, into the tactile center of the brain. And there the brain says, oh, hard and a little bit cool, and fairly smooth with a little grain to the wood. That's what I'm experiencing. I'm not experiencing an external podium. I'm experiencing the mind's reaction. And again, it's not that the podium is moving through my nerves and coming up to the brain. No, it's an encoded message. And then the brain interprets that. That's all I experience through any of the senses. I don't experience the external world directly. The senses are not direct revealers of the external world. I experience the whole world only within my mind as my mind interprets certain signals that come to it. And so matter is only a hypothesis. It may be a good hypothesis. It may work well for scientific work and so forth, but matter is only a hypothesis, nothing more than that. No one has ever seen, touched, felt, smelt, or tasted matter. It's impossible. You use matter to explain what your mind has produced as a result of all of this experience. So the whole universe exists within your mind. Now, of course, the common sense thing is, and what scientists would say, is that the objective world exists. It's just that, yes, your senses go through all of this processing in order to experience it. And yes, they paint it with color and all of that. And you hear certain sounds that are beautiful sounds and harmonic, and certain sounds that you don't like, and that also is a mental phenomenon, not an external phenomenon. Sound itself doesn't discriminate between good sound and bad sound. It's the mind which does. But still, your senses are revealing to you in your own mind an external world. That may be, but it may not be as well. Because if all of this that I'm seeing is produced by my mind, then where are these senses that I say are bringing information from an external world into my mind? My senses are experienced in my mind. My body is experienced in my mind. In fact, neuroscientists have found, that if you put a probe into a brain in a certain point, the person who, as you know, people can be awake and alert with their skull cap moved and the brain exposed. If the person is awake and you put a probe into a certain point in the brain, their perception of their own body disappears. The perception of the body disappears. People who have taken psychedelic drugs, some people who have taken psychedelic drugs, the body itself disappears. The body disappears. They can't find the body. The body itself is in the mind. The body itself, the perception of the body is in the mind. So if the body, the senses, and this whole idea of the trajectory of the nerves coming up to the brain and everything, if all of that is in the mind, then the very existence of an external world itself is questionable. You can't prove that there's an external world. Now, many people will say, and it's not a bad argument, it's just that it's not an absolute argument. Many people will say that, well, Swami, there's so many people who see the same thing. So that proves that there's an external world because we all share the same perception. Well, that's not absolute. It may be a good argument and a good enough for most of us, but if I perceive the whole world within my own mind, I'm perceiving all of you within my own mind also. And so there's no surety of an external objective world. You cannot prove it. You can't prove it. And there are some extreme Vedantists who say that that is the truth. There is no objective world, that the mind is just a misperception. It's nothing but a misperception. If my mind were perfectly pure, I would see nothing but God. And even if I saw all of you and all of this, I would see it completely differently from the way I see it now. Look at Ramakrishna's experience. Look at Ramakrishna's experience, where he talks about his direct experience, where he sees everything as just like clear pillows of, like plastic pillows floating on the ocean, or like bubbles in the ocean. Everything is just made of God. Everything is just a bubbling up of divinity. Everything is made of God. There's nothing but the divine being. Or in another state, the universe disappears altogether. And so, at least we should understand that we're not seeing a material universe, that is a theory to explain our experience. And it works at the physical level. It causes us problems at other levels because we begin to believe in it too firmly as too absolutely real, and we begin to think, as the materialist does, that nothing else is real. Well, no, matter itself is unreal. Matter itself is an interpretation of color, pressure, sound, etc. We use matter to explain how that happens, why it is that I see things, I feel things, etc. So the question then comes, is there a world separate from the perceiving self? You know the famous question in Western philosophy, that if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, did the tree fall? Well, that's a rather primitive way of phrasing the question. It sounds good in Western philosophy, and that's because in the West, we strangely, and I'm not against the West, I grew up in the West, there are many great things that the West has done, including modern science, and many other things that the West has done, many great things. But philosophically, we were rather primitive. And one of the things that was never discovered in the West, that now some cutting-edge scientists are beginning to look into, is consciousness itself. In the West, when we talk about consciousness, we mean mental processes, conscious mental processes. There's the unconscious mind we don't see and the conscious mind we do see, and consciousness is just that. conscious mental processes. And so that's why the materialist says, well, consciousness itself is just an epiphenomenon, a bubbling up of matter. When you have matter in a complex enough configuration, you get bubbling up of what we call consciousness, but it's just a special bubbling of matter itself. Oh, that's so stupid. That's so stupid. That's a lame philosophy. That's not even worthy of a child. Children are much smarter than that, much smarter than that. The materialist is a foolish person because, again, saying that matter is the only thing that is real, you've never experienced matter, you can never experience matter, and you're going to say that that's the only real thing. What you do experience, always, at all times, even in deep sleep, even in states of unconsciousness, is consciousness. That's the only thing that you know and the only thing that you're sure of. And so the idea that consciousness is a bubbling up of matter when matter can't even be proven to exist, that's foolish. Whereas consciousness, at least you know. That's one of the things that you're sure of because you are aware. So a better way, a Vedantic way of putting that question, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to perceive it, does it exist? Is the way that it was framed in some Vedantic texts is there a world apart from a perceiving self? There was a little book that I just did a simple translation of, Advaita Makaranda, one most of you haven't heard of. It's a little known Advaitic text, but a wonderful text on Advaita. And that takes up this idea that if there's no perceiving self, does the world exist? No. How do I know that this exists because I perceive it. You know, if I'm out of the room, you still see it, and you know that it exists. If there is no consciousness anywhere, there's no consciousness to perceive it, does this exist? No. Right now it exists only in my mind. What I see only exists in my mind. Yes, I won't try to prove, because that's unprovable, except in the ultimate experience. I won't try to prove that there's not an objective universe that is causing this perception. But without the perception of this table in consciousness, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Nothing exists if it's not being perceived. Now, how do we come back to a common sense universe, which is what most of us want to live in? Well, there is an idea in Indian philosophy. There's several interpretations. So I'll begin to close now. And I'll close by talking about these three ways of interpreting the world that we see. One way is what's called Srishti Drishdivada. It sounds terrible, but it actually makes sense if you know the meaning of the words. And you don't need to know the Sanskrit, but Srishti Drishdivada means creation, experience, the doctrine of creation experience. What it means is that there is creation, and therefore I see it. There is a world, and therefore I see it. It's basically the common sense view. So even if you understand this idea that the whole world that I see is perceived in my own mind, still, what is the basis for that perception? So this view, and this is the view that most Vedanta philosophers themselves take. Shankaracharya usually takes this view. Swami Vivekananda often takes this view, not exclusively, but often. And Shankaracharya also not exclusively, but often takes this view, that the world exists, that's why we see it. And so there is something that we're perceiving objectively. And in that view, there's the idea that there is Brahma, not Brahman, the absolute, but Brahma, the creator. The Brahma, the creator, is the cosmic mind. And this whole universe exists in the cosmic mind. And so I see this, you see it, he sees it, she sees it, because it exists in the cosmic mind. I see the harmonium there because it exists in the cosmic mind. And so there, all of us who are sharing this same experience, we're seeing it. And so even if all of us leave the room, all of this is still here because it's within the cosmic mind. The whole universe is constantly being perceived by the cosmic mind. So there is it's also not an objective universe, but it's a universe that is mental, that exists, that is a thought universe in the cosmic mind. And then we are participating in that cosmic mind. Our minds are little whirlpools in the cosmic mind, and so we see parts of it, and the cosmic mind sees the whole. So even if there's a dead planet far out in the far corner of the universe where there are no living beings or anything, that's still existing in the cosmic mind, and so it's still being perceived. It's still being, it still can be said to exist because it exists within the cosmic mind. When the cosmic mind closes, goes to sleep at the end of a long age of creation, then it all disappears because that was only a thought in the cosmic mind. And when that the Brahma says, okay, that's enough creation for now, I'm going to sleep. And it goes to sleep, then everything just disappears. Not that the rocks and the planets and the stars and everything sort of fall into a cosmic dustbin. No, they were only ideas in the cosmic mind. So when the mind goes to sleep, just like our dreams, when we wake up from a dream, we don't have to sweep up the pieces of the dream from the floor that fell when we woke up from the dream. No, it was just an idea that disappeared. So this also is a dream in the cosmic mind, and we are dreaming within the cosmic mind, dreams within dreams. And so we see this. So that's a view that gives a place to objectivity, gives a place to an objective world. Another view is called the opposite. This was Srishti Drishtivada, and the next one is Drishti Shrishtivada. That is, my perceiving is creation. Right now I'm seeing all of this. It's my own projection. It's my own creation. I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing Houston. So that now doesn't exist. My seeing is perceiving. Now that's a difficult position to maintain. And there's not time now to argue in favor of that, so at least that you see that there is some sense for it. There is a rationale to it, but it is a position which is too rarefied for most people. And if it doesn't make sense to you, that's okay. You don't believe in anything that doesn't make sense. If something doesn't make sense, don't believe in it. But there are people to whom that does make sense, and so they follow it as their basic philosophy, that my perceiving is creating. Just as when I dream a whole world into being, peopled with people. I meet somebody in the dream, and they tell me about their grandmother, and I go with them to their house, and I meet their grandmother. It's all happening just in my dream. The mind has such creative power, it creates a whole world within itself. And it's just a thought world, just a mentally created world. And so this view says that the same is true here. And then there's a third view, which is the most rarefied and the least practiced because of that. And that is Ajatavada, the idea that there is no creation at all. I'm making a mistake in thinking that there is a creation. When I wake up from the mistake, I'll see that no, there was nothing but Brahman. There never was anything from Brahman. So now let me close by saying, I've left a number of ideas hanging here, and so we'll have question and answers in a few minutes. But let me close by saying that in spiritual life, when we come to spiritual life, and that's the most important thing in life, is spiritual life, we have to choose something that makes sense to us, and something that we can practice, something that we can do, something we can live with, something that can take us towards illumination, take us towards God, take us towards the self. We have to be intensely practical in spiritual life. In our philosophy and other things, we can be as rarefied as we like, but when we come to practical spiritual life, we have to be intensely practical because it has to make sense to us or we won't be able to practice it. It's that which makes sense to us that we can practice. And so any of these three, the view that there is an objective world, that it exists within the mind of Brahma, or that there is no objective world, there's just the perception is creation itself, a form of pure idealism, or the idea that there is no universe whatsoever. Again, the hardest, because you're seeing the world all of the time. So it's very difficult to deny the existence of the only thing that you see. So it's like denying the ground under your feet. So that's the hardest and the least practiced. But the other two, you have to choose that which is practicable. And so for the vast majority of people, the idea that there is an objective universe, but the only thing that this analysis of the universe that we've done this morning should do for that is to show that the universe is not what it seems. When we say that everything is divine, what do we mean? If I'm to look on every person as an image of divinity, look on everything as divine by its very nature, what does that mean? It's not that the material thing is, as matter is divine, or a person as I experience them now, that what I'm experiencing now is divinity. No, I am experiencing divinity, nothing but divinity. None of us have ever experienced anything but divinity, but wrongly interpreted. And so if I can see this whole universe as a subtle universe, yes, resting in the mind of Brahma, that Brahma has brought this whole universe into existence, and we're all participating in the dream of Brahma, then it's much easier to see that, yes, this podium, which seems so hard and real, stable, but which science tells me is not at all, is mainly space and electric charge, but mostly just empty space. This which seems so real, that it's not even just that. Yes, that's a wonderful way of looking at it, the scientific way, and is very productive for technology and so forth, and for our understanding and manipulation of the world. But it goes even deeper than that. What does that resolve itself into? It resolves itself into idea. Swamiji said that in his time, before a few years before Einstein's relativity theory in 1906, he said that we will show that matter and energy are equivalent. Matter and energy are equivalent. That was one of the things Einstein did, though Einstein did that part of relativity reluctantly. He wasn't really very happy with that conclusion. But it was a conclusion, and so he, at the instigation of his wife, he put it in a footnote in his paper. So Swamiji said that we'll find that matter and energy are equivalent. We know that now, that they can be seen in terms of each other. But he said that there is a higher unity that they come from, and that higher unity is mind, that they come out of mind. And that mind is either your mind or the mind of Brahma. To think that it's your mind is pretty hard, because our minds seem pretty weak. It doesn't seem like it's capable of doing all of this. But it is the mind of the mind of the Creator, that this whole universe rests as an idea in the mind of Creator. And I'll end with this statement and then a chant. Swamiji said that the universe eventually becomes perceived more and more like, the universe becomes perceived more and more like an idea. And eventually we see not even idea, but we perceive the universe as the divine being itself. So what is the world? The world is God. God appearing as idea, and idea appearing as objective fact. So let me give a closing chant, and then I think there's music, and then question and answers. Okay. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadhaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarvam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace is in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.